John stood on the balcony of the embassy, gazing out at the sprawling city below, illuminated by the twin moons of Arida, its towers stretching high into the violet sky, the wind gently brushing against his face, bringing with it the scent of alien flowers from the palace gardens. He had spent years on this world as an ambassador representing Earth, but his mission had always been more than that to him. It was a chance to get closer to her, the Princess Aria. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was her strength, her wisdom, and her grace that had truly captured his heart. He had admired her from afar for years, but never once dared speak of it, not even to himself, for fear of ruining the delicate bond they had formed in their work together. Aria was a figure of unparalleled power, the ruler of a planet that had once been at the center of a galactic empire long ago, and yet despite her royal lineage, she was not the type to demand respect by birthright alone. She had earned it with her sharp mind and calm leadership style. In every council meeting, she spoke with the authority of someone who knew not only the importance of her words, but the weight of every decision she made. Her people loved her. But what John saw was the vulnerable side of her, the side she showed only to those she trusted, the one that kept her up late at night with the burden of ruling a fractured world while trying to navigate the ever-present political turmoil that came with being a leader of such great power. The friendship they had built over the years was something John cherished deeply. It had begun with simple diplomatic conversations about trade agreements, cultural exchange, and alliances, but slowly it evolved into something more, something that wasn't just about work or politics. It was about two souls who understood each other in a way no one else did, the way Aria could speak in the language of emotions without words, or the way John's quick wit always seemed to catch her off guard whenever she least expected it. They had shared countless moments of laughter during their long nights, discussing the future of their respective worlds, their dreams, their fears, their hopes, and somewhere along the way John had fallen in love with her completely. It wasn't a love born out of fantasy or some fleeting infatuation. No, it was deeper than that. It was a love forged over years of shared experiences in the heat of battle, the strain of diplomacy, the quiet moments in between the chaos. It was a love that had grown like a slow-burning flame that refused to die. And now, as he stood there watching the stars, he felt the weight of it on his chest, a feeling he could no longer deny. His heart ached with the truth he had kept hidden for so long. John had always been careful, never letting anything slip, never allowing himself to show how deeply he cared. But tonight everything felt different. Something had shifted. The peace talks were over, the crisis averted, and for the first time in years, John had a moment of clarity. He was tired of pretending, tired of pretending that he was content with just being her friend, tired of hiding the truth from himself, tired of being this close to the one person he loved more than anything in the universe and not saying a word about it. He had decided this was the night, the moment had finally come. The time to confess his feelings to Aria had arrived, and though his mind screamed at him to turn away, to retreat into the safety of his role as an ambassador, he couldn't. He would never forgive himself if he didn't take the chance, if he didn't tell her what he had felt for so long. As the light from the twin moons bathed the balcony in a soft glow, John's heart pounded in his chest as he turned and walked inside toward the room where Aria was waiting for him. She had already heard of the crisis resolution and was expecting his report. But tonight, he had no intentions of discussing politics or diplomacy. Tonight, he would tell her the truth. John stepped into the room and found Aria standing by the window, her back to him. As she gazed out at the sprawling city below, her posture was regal, yet there was an air of wariness about her, something that had only become more apparent in recent months. As the political tensions between the planets escalated, she turned when she heard the door creak open and offered him a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes, but still managed to warm his heart. It had been a long time since they had shared a quiet moment like this, just the two of them, without the weight of responsibility hanging over their heads. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to begin, but he knew that if he didn't act now, he might never get another chance. His mind raced through 1,000 different scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. But he pushed the fear aside. He had already decided what needed to be done. Taking a deep breath, he walked toward her and stood at her side. The space between them felt charged, as if the very air had shifted in response to the unspoken words between them. "I never thought it would be this hard," John said, his voice a little rougher than usual. "The things we've been through together, the things we've seen, I thought maybe it would make me stronger. But it only makes it harder." Arya looked at him with a puzzled expression, her brows furrowed slightly, as if she were trying to read his thoughts. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. He could feel his pulse quickening. As the words tumbled out in a rush, "Arya, I've spent years here with you, working beside you, laughing with you, sharing everything with you. But I've been hiding something that's been growing inside me for so long that I can't ignore it anymore." He paused for a moment, looking at her, hoping she could see the truth in his eyes. "I've fallen in love with you, and I can't keep pretending that I haven't." The words hung in the air heavy, and raw. The silence between them stretched longer than he expected. His heart hammered in his chest as he awaited her response. Arya's expression remained unreadable as she took a slow step back, her gaze now fixed on the floor, her fingers twitching at her sides as if she were trying to hold herself together. John's throat tightened as a wave of anxiety swept over him, the fear of rejection threatening to consume him. But before he could say another word, she lifted her head and met his gaze, her eyes reflecting a depth of emotion he hadn't expected. "I've known for a long time, John." Arya's voice was soft but steady, the words slipping out with a quiet intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "I've always known, but I couldn't allow myself to believe it, not with everything at stake." She took another step back, her back now pressed against the cold stone of the wall, her gaze unwavering as she continued. "The weight of my people's expectations, the traditions that bind me, the prophecy that looms over us all. It's never been simple, not for me, not for anyone who dares to be close to me." Her words cut through him like a blade, leaving a trail of confusion and pain in their wake. John opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out, his mind welling with questions he had no answers for, as Arya's confession settled over him like a storm. He didn't understand what she meant by prophecy or the traditions she spoke of, but he could see the conflict in her eyes, the way her body tensed, as if the very idea of them being together threatened to tear apart everything she had worked so hard to build. "Arya," he whispered, his voice breaking as he reached out for her hand, but she stepped back again, shaking her head. "You don't understand, John," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I cannot allow myself the luxury of love, not when it would destroy everything." John's hand hung in the air as Arya stepped away from him, her words echoed in his mind. But they didn't make sense. The luxury of love. He couldn't understand why something so simple, so pure, could be seen as a threat. He took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm that was raging inside him. He had always respected her strength, her leadership, but now he saw a side of her he hadn't fully understood before, a side that was burdened by something he couldn't see but felt deeply. "I don't understand, Arya." His voice was low but insistent. "What could be more important than us?" She turned away from him, her gaze drifting out to the stars beyond the window, her posture rigid, like a soldier preparing for battle. He took a step closer to her, careful not to crowd her, but unwilling to let the distance between them grow any larger. "Everything is more important than us," she whispered, almost to herself, but John heard it clearly, and the weight of her words hit him like a physical blow. "My people, my kingdom, my duty to this world, those are the things that have to come first. You knew this when you came here." She turned to face him finally, her eyes flashing with the sharp intensity that had always made her such a commanding presence. "You're an outsider, John. Your people don't understand us. They never have, they never will." Her voice trembled slightly as she fought to keep her composure, but it was clear the pain she was in was just as deep as his own. "I don't care about that," he said, his words coming out more forcefully than he intended, but he couldn't stop them now. "I came here to help. I came here to build something better, something lasting. And along the way I fell in love with you." His voice softened as he took another step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't care what you people think. I don't care about the politics. I only care about you." Arya's eyes flickered with something he couldn't quite place as she stepped back again, her lips pressed together in a tight line. "It's not that simple, John," she said, her voice hardening. "It never has been for me. If I let myself feel what you want me to feel, everything I've worked for, everything my people have worked for will fall apart. I can't afford that. I can't be that selfish." Her eyes shone with unshed tears, but she quickly blinked them away and turned her face toward the window again, as though she couldn't bear to look at him. John felt his heart clench at the sight of her, so distant, so torn between two worlds, two lives, one where she was the beloved princess and ruler, and one where she could be with him without the weight of her crown upon her shoulders, but she was trapped in the expectations of her people and her royal duty. "Arya, please," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "You don't have to carry this alone. Let me help you. Let me stand by your side. No matter what happens, we can find a way to make it work." Arya finally turned to face him fully, her eyes filled with a quiet sadness that made his chest tighten. "I wish it were that simple, John. But this world is not like yours. We are bound by traditions that date back thousands of years. And if I break them, it will destroy everything, not just for me, but for all of us," she said, her voice thick with emotion. The air between them felt heavy, like a storm waiting to break, neither of them knowing what would happen next, but both of them knowing that the choice had been made. It was just a matter of which path they would take from here. John stood frozen in place, the weight of Arya's words pressing down on him harder than anything he had ever experienced. He wanted to shout, he wanted to make her see reason, to demand that she not let something as intangible as tradition tear them apart. But the look in her eyes stopped him. She wasn't just bound by her people's laws. She was bound by the very essence of her existence, the role she had been born into, the role she had chosen to embrace, her duty to her planet and to its future was more than a job. It was her life. Every decision, every action was weighed against the lives of billions who looked to her as their beacon of hope. And yet in that moment, John saw something he hadn't noticed before: the sorrow in her eyes, the pain she hid so well behind her strength, the love she had always felt for him, but couldn't afford to acknowledge. He realized that Arya was caught in a war of her own, one that had nothing to do with politics or power, but with the deepest of human emotions and the responsibilities she had inherited. "Arya," his voice was softer now, his heart aching as he stepped toward her slowly, as though afraid that one wrong move might shatter the fragile connection they had just begun to build again. "You don't have to carry this burden alone. I'm here. I always will be, no matter the cost." He reached out for her hand, but she stepped back again, her face a mask of resolve. "It's not just about what I want, John," she said, her voice firm, but the underlying emotion betrayed her words. "If it were that simple, I would already be with you, but my people won't allow it. I can't betray them. Not even for you, not even for my own heart." She looked at him then with an expression that was almost painful to see. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to make you feel like you were nothing more than a distant dream to me. But there are things in this world we can't control, things bigger than us, things that can destroy everything if we don't follow the path laid before us." John closed his eyes briefly, taking in her words, trying to understand them. But it felt like trying to understand a riddle whose answer was always just out of reach. His mind raced with thoughts of how they could fight back, how they could change things, how they could live in a world where they didn't have to hide anymore, where love wasn't forbidden or bound by ancient laws. But the more he thought about it, the more it felt like fighting a storm with bare hands. "What if we could change things, Arya?" he asked, his voice a low whisper. "What if there's a way for us to be together without breaking everything you've worked for?" He took another step closer, his eyes locked with hers, searching for some flicker of hope. "What if we don't have to follow these ancient rules? What if we can find a new way forward, a way that's ours and ours alone?" For a long moment, Arya didn't say anything. She just stood there looking at him, as though she were weighing every word, every possibility. In the silence between them, John could see the conflict in her eyes, the uncertainty, the doubt, but also something else, something he couldn't quite name, a small spark of hope buried beneath the weight of her duty. "You don't understand, John," she finally whispered again, her voice barely audible. "These aren't just laws, these are the foundation of everything we are as a people. Breaking them could mean the end of everything we've built, the end of our way of life." Her eyes dropped to the floor, as though she couldn't bear to look at him anymore. "You don't know what you're asking." "I know I'm asking you to take a risk," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "But isn't it worth it, Arya? Isn't it worth it to try to build something new, even if it's hard, even if it means taking a leap of faith?" His heart pounded in his chest as he reached for her hand. Once more, this time she didn't pull away. Instead, she allowed him to take it gently, her fingers trembling beneath his touch. "Maybe," she whispered softly, Maybe it's worth it. John felt a surge of hope course through him as her words hung in the air, between them her hand trembling in his, the connection they shared pulsing stronger than ever. But even in that brief moment of shared hope, John could sense the uncertainty that lingered in Aria's eyes. She was a ruler bound by laws and prophecies that stretched back through generations. Her entire life had been shaped by expectations and duties. He had never known the burden of carrying an entire world on his shoulders, and he could see now how deeply it weighed on her, how it was tearing her apart inside, even as she desperately wanted to reach out and take the chance with him. Aria, John said gently, his voice filled with both concern and determination. I know it's not going to be easy. I know this is bigger than just us, but we can't live in fear of what might happen. We can't keep denying what we feel, not for a future that might not even come or for rules that were made before we were born. He squeezed her hand a little tighter, hoping she could feel the strength he was offering, hoping she could feel how much he believed in them, how much he was willing to fight for them. Aria's eyes flickered with emotion, but she shook her head slowly as though the weight of his words was too much for her to bear. You don't understand, John. The prophecy is not just some old tale told to scare children. It's a truth that is woven into the very fabric of our existence. Many people have lived and died by it for centuries. It dictates the balance of our world. It is the reason we still stand as a united civilization today. If I defy it, if I choose a path outside of what is foretold, it could tear everything apart. And I can't be the one to do that. Her voice broke as she said the last words, and for a moment, the mask of a ruler fell, revealing the vulnerability that she had hidden so carefully for so long. John's heart ached as he watched the princess crumble before him, not in defeat, but in the weight of the impossible choice. She faced the responsibility she had carried for so long now, felt like an unbearable weight, one that threatened to consume her, no matter how much she might want to fight it. Aria, you are more than your prophecy. You are more than the crown you wear, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I see you for who you truly are, not just the princess, but the woman who has fought so hard to protect her people, to make this world a better place. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself as he moved closer to her. You deserve happiness, too. You deserve to live freely without fear of what might happen. Her eyes welled with tears at his words, but she quickly wiped them away before they could fall. She took a shaky breath, trying to regain her composure, but it was clear that she was struggling. I wish it were that simple, John. I wish I could just leave all of this behind and follow my heart, but I can't, she whispered, her voice barely audible. There's too much at stake. If I abandon my duty, if I break from what is expected of me, the consequences will ripple across the galaxy. John's throat tightened as he realized the full depth of her dilemma. She was trapped in a cage of her own, making a cage forged by the weight of her responsibilities and the impossible expectations of her people. He wanted to shout that they could change everything together, that love could break through all the barriers. But he knew the truth deep down, that it wasn't just a matter of willpower, it was a matter of survival for her world, for her people. Then we'll find a way, Aria, he said, his voice unwavering. We'll find a way to change this world, to rewrite the rules if we have to. We don't have to accept the prophecy. We don't have to accept the lies that have been passed down for centuries. He placed his other hand on her shoulder, gently urging her to look at him. We can fight for something better, for a future where we don't have to choose between love and duty. Aria closed her eyes for a long moment, as though weighing his words against the truth she had always known. Finally, she opened them and met his gaze, her expression still torn, but something new flickered in her eyes, a faint glimmer of hope that hadn't been there before. Maybe we can try, she whispered softly. Maybe we can fight for a future together, but it won't be easy. John felt a rush of relief flood through him at her words. It was the first sign of hope he had seen in her eyes, a crack in the wall she had built around herself, a wall that had always seemed so impenetrable. She had agreed to try, and for the first time he could see a glimpse of the future they could have together. It wouldn't be easy, he knew that, but it would be worth it, every moment, every sacrifice, if it meant they could be together without fear of the consequences. "We'll face it together, Arya," he said, his voice firm with resolve. "No matter what happens, we're in this together. We'll find a way to make it work." He stepped closer and took her hand, once more holding it gently in his thumb tracing circles against her palm, as though grounding her in the moment, grounding them both in the bond. They shared. The weight of her people's expectations still loomed large, but for the first time it seemed a little more bearable with her standing beside him. Arya looked down at their joined hands, as if considering the decision she had just made. She took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "We'll try, Jon," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I can't promise you everything will work out the way we want it to." Her eyes met his, with a mixture of uncertainty and determination. "I'm not sure what will happen, but if I do this, if I stand with you, there's no going back." She swallowed hard, as if the very thought of breaking the prophecy was enough to make her heart ache. "I'll be putting everything at risk, my people, my family, everything I've worked for all these years." Her voice faltered for a moment before she steadied herself again. "But I can't keep living a lie. I can't keep pretending that this isn't real." Jon squeezed her hand, gently urging her to continue. "Arya, we'll figure it out together. You don't have to do this alone. You don't have to carry all the weight by yourself." His voice was full of sincerity, his heart aching for her, as he realized how heavy the burden she carried truly was, how much she had sacrificed for the sake of her people and her crown. "I know," she whispered, and for the first time since their conversation had begun, there was a softness in her voice that Jon hadn't heard before. It was as if she were finally allowing herself to feel the weight of the love they shared. "I know I don't have to do it alone, but it's hard to let go of everything I've known, everything that's been expected of me." She shook her head slowly, her brow furrowed with the struggle of reconciling the two parts of herself, the princess and the woman who loved him, the woman who wanted to be free to choose her own path. Jon stepped forward and cupped her face, gently lifting her gaze to meet his. "You don't have to let go of everything, Arya. You're still the same person you've always been. You'll still be the ruler you were meant to be, but you'll also be the person you choose to be." He whispered the words with an urgency he couldn't fully explain, the truth of it deep inside him, a conviction he couldn't shake. "We don't have to lose ourselves in this. We just need to find a new way forward together." Arya's eyes softened as she looked at him, the walls she had built around her heart beginning to crumble with each word he spoke, each touch that reminded her of the love she had hidden for so long. She nodded slowly and took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for the battle ahead. "Then we begin," she said softly. "We begin a new path together, no matter the cost, no matter what comes." Jon smiled, then his heart swelling with a sense of triumph, but also with the deep understanding that this was just the beginning of something far more complicated than either of them had anticipated. But it was a fight worth taking, a stand for a fight that would change the future of their worlds forever. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of uncertainty and quiet decisions. Arya and Jon had spoken of their intentions to a select few trusted allies, but the truth of what they were planning had not yet reached the wider court or her family. Arya's father, the king, had been an immovable force in her life, and his expectations weighed heavily on her every action. They both knew that if the plan was going to work, they would have to face the consequences of their defiance head-on, but neither of them was prepared for how soon those consequences would come. One evening, after a long day of covert meetings and whispered discussions, Jon stood beside Arya in the palace garden, the quiet hum of the city below, their only companion. The twin moons above cast their soft glow on the flowers that surrounded them, but the beauty of the moment was lost on both of them. The tension in the air was palpable. It was as though they both knew that a storm was coming, and it was only a matter of time before they would have to face it. "I've never felt more alive," Arya said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper, as she stood beside him, her gaze distant, yet filled with a quiet fire. "I've never felt so free, Jon." She looked at him, then her eyes searching his, as if trying to find the strength to believe what she was saying. "But I'm scared," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm scared of what this will do to everyone I care about, to my people, to you." Jon turned to face her, his heart aching at the vulnerability in her words. He reached for her hand and held it gently in his. "I know," he said, his voice steady but soft. "I'm scared too, But I can't keep living in a world where we deny what's real. I can't keep pretending that what we have doesn't matter, because it does. It matters more than anything." He squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We'll face whatever comes together, no matter how hard it is." Arya took a deep breath and nodded slowly, her fingers curling around his hand, as if grounding herself in the moment, grounding herself in him. I want to believe that we can change things, but the truth is, John, everything we've worked for, everything we've known, is about to change in ways we can't control. And that terrifies me more than anything else." Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke, but she held herself together with the fierce determination that had always defined her. "I know," John whispered, "but we can't let fear rule us. We can't let fear stop us from fighting for something better, something worth fighting for." He paused for a moment, as if considering his next words carefully. "If we're going to change this world, Arya, we have to start with us. We have to make the choice to take a stand, no matter what comes after." For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the silence between them thick with the weight of the decision they had made, and the knowledge that there was no turning back. Arya's grip on his hand tightened, and she looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and sadness, her eyes reflecting the fear she couldn't fully hide, but also the love she had long since buried beneath the responsibilities of her title. "Then let's do it," she said finally, her voice stronger now, with a resolve that matched his own. "Let's face whatever comes together. But I need you to promise me one thing, John. Promise me that no matter what happens, you won't walk away from me." Her eyes locked with his, her voice low and full of vulnerability, but also trust. "I promise," John said without hesitation, his heart full of certainty as he spoke the words, "I'm with you every step of the way." Arya nodded slowly, her lips curving into a faint smile, though it was tinged with sadness. "Then let's begin," she whispered, and together they turned toward the future they knew would be filled with challenges, but also with the possibility of something new, something they would create together in defiance of everything that had come before. The days that followed were a blur of tension and careful planning. The palace buzzed with a subtle unease as whispers began to spread of Arya's intentions, and the rumored defiance she and John were planning to make public. They knew the stakes had never been higher, but neither of them could afford to back down now. Their decision had been made, and the only thing left to do was face the consequences together as a united front. Arya spent hours in her chambers, late into the night, poring over ancient texts and the sacred laws that bound her people, searching for a loophole, a way to fulfill her duty to her kingdom, without sacrificing the future she wanted with John. But the more she read, the more the weight of her predicament pressed down on her shoulders. She had spent her whole life preparing for this moment, the moment she would be forced to choose between duty and love. But no amount of preparation could have prepared her for how it felt to be on the edge of breaking everything she had ever known. John was there by her side through it all. He never wavered, even when the enormity of their decision seemed unbearable. He was her anchor, her constant reminder that they could do this together, that they didn't have to face the world alone. They met in secret, when they could, slipping away from their respective duties to find solace in each other's company, when no one else could reach them. The moments of peace they shared felt like stolen treasures in a world that had no place for their love. One evening, as they stood together in the quiet courtyard just beyond the palace walls, the weight of what was about to happen hung heavily between them. The moonlight cast long shadows across the stone floor, and the stars above seemed distant, as though they too were watching the unfolding drama of the universe. "We're almost there," John said, his voice low and steady as he looked at her, his eyes searching hers for any sign of doubt. But all he saw was determination tempered with fear. "Tomorrow we make our stand. Tomorrow we let everyone know where we stand." He squeezed her hand, gently reminding her that they were in this together, that there was no turning back. Arya nodded slowly, her expression unreadable, as she turned her gaze to the dark horizon. "I'm ready," she said, though the words didn't sound entirely certain. She took a deep breath and let the cool night air fill her lungs, as though preparing for what was to come. "I've been ready for this moment for years, and yet now that it's finally here, I'm not sure I'm ready at all," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly as she turned back to face him. "There's so much I still don't know, so much I can't control, and that terrifies me, John." She looked at him, her eyes filled with the vulnerability she had hidden for so long beneath her royal armor. "I know," he whispered, his voice full of empathy. "But you don't have to control everything, Arya. You just have to choose us. You just have to choose this moment, right now. And everything else will fall into place. We'll figure out the rest together." He'd brushed a strand of hair from her face and gently cupped her cheek. "I'm not asking you to have all the answers. I'm just asking you to trust me, to trust us." Arya closed her eyes for a moment, leaning into his touch as the weight of his words settled in her heart. She had spent so much of her life carrying the expectations of an entire planet, the responsibility of a throne, that she had forgotten what it felt like to simply be a person, to simply love without the burden of duty hanging over her head. In that moment, she realized that love was never meant to be a burden. It was meant to be a gift, something to hold onto, something to fight for. "You're right," she whispered, her voice softer now, but resolute. "I spent my whole life thinking that I had to carry everything on my own, that I had to be perfect. But I can't do this alone anymore. I don't want to do this alone." She opened her eyes and looked directly at him, her gaze unwavering. "I choose you, John. I choose us. And whatever happens after that, we'll face it together." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything she had feared, everything she had longed for. John smiled and pulled her into a gentle embrace, his arms wrapping around her as if holding onto the very lifeline she had given him. The future was uncertain, but in that moment it didn't matter, because they had each other, and that was all they needed to move forward, to face the coming storm and whatever trials it would bring. "Then let's go make history," he whispered into her ear, his heart beating steady with the knowledge that they had already taken the first step toward a future they would create on their own terms. The day arrived with a quiet urgency that both John and Arya could feel deep in their bones. The palace seemed to hold its breath as preparations were made, the air thick with anticipation and unease. Whispers of rebellion and defiance had already begun to spread throughout the court and beyond the city walls as the rumor of Arya's plans took hold. But neither she nor John wavered. They had made their choice, and now there was no turning back. They stood at the precipice of something that could change everything. Arya stood in front of the mirror in her chambers, her royal gown flowing around her as she adjusted the golden crown atop her head. The familiar weight of it seemed somehow heavier today, as though the crown itself understood the gravity of the decision she was about to make. John had arrived earlier that morning and had stayed by her side, offering quiet reassurance. But even his presence could not ease the storm that raged inside her. She had known this day would come, but now that it was finally here, the fear threatened to swallow her whole. "You're ready," John's voice came from the doorway, and she turned to see him standing there, watching her with eyes full of understanding and support. Despite the chaos surrounding them, he was calm and steady, and for a moment she allowed herself to take comfort in that his presence was her anchor in a world that seemed to be spinning out of control. "I don't feel ready," Arya admitted, her voice small, despite the strength she had shown in the days leading up to this moment. "I spent my whole life being trained to follow the rules, to obey the traditions of my people, and now I'm about to break them all at once." She turned to face him fully, her eyes filled with both fear and determination. "What if I fail? What if everything I've worked for comes crashing down because of this?" John crossed the room to her and gently cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You won't fail, Arya, because this isn't about failure. It's about choosing who you are, choosing what you believe in, and that's something no one can take away from you." He kissed her forehead softly, as though sealing his promise with a touch. "And you won't be alone in this. I'm right here with you every step of the way." Arya nodded, slowly taking a deep breath and letting it out slowly. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to feel his warmth and his strength seeping into her. The weight of the crown on her head felt less oppressive with him beside her, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something resembling peace. "We can't turn back now," she said, quietly opening her eyes and looking into his with a new resolve. "If we're going to do this, we have to commit fully to it, no matter what happens after." "We'll do it together," John whispered, his voice filled with certainty and love. With it, they made their way toward the throne room, where Arya's father, the king, awaited them. The halls were eerily quiet. As they walked through them, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls, it felt as though the palace itself was holding its breath, waiting for the storm to break. Arya's heart pounded in her chest as they approached the doors to the throne room, the weight of what she was about to do pressing down on her like a heavy stone. But she didn't hesitate. When the guards opened the doors, she walked through them with Jon by her side, her head held high, her steps firm, even as the eyes of the entire court turned toward them. King Theron sat upon his throne, his expression unreadable. As Arya and Jon approached the dais, Arya could feel the tension in the room, the weight of expectation pressing down on her as her father's gaze locked with hers, his eyes hard and cold. "Arya," the king's voice was low, but filled with authority, "you are late, and you have brought an outsider into my court." His eyes flickered briefly to Jon before returning to his daughter. "Explain yourself." Arya took a deep breath and stepped forward. She could feel the eyes of the court on her, but she did not falter. She had made her choice, and now she would stand by it. "Father," she began, her voice steady but unwavering, "I have come to tell you that I will not follow the path you have laid for me. I will not marry the prince you have chosen for me, nor will I continue to live in the shadow of tradition that has kept me from living my own life." She glanced at Jon briefly before looking back at her father. "I have chosen love over duty, and I will stand by it no matter the cost." A murmur spread through the court, and Arya could feel the shock ripple through the room, but she did not look away from her father. She held her ground, knowing that the next words she spoke would either shatter everything or set them on a path to something new. "Your kingdom is important to me, father, but I will not sacrifice my happiness for the sake of a crown," she finished, her voice strong and unwavering. The king's eyes narrowed as he studied her face. The room fell into a heavy silence as the weight of her words settled around them. "You have no idea what you're doing," King Theron said, his voice cold and filled with anger. But there was something else beneath it, something more raw and vulnerable. "You think you can just cast aside everything we've built, everything I've worked for the sake of some fleeting feeling of love?" He stood slowly, his tall frame towering over her as he descended from the throne. Arya stood firm, her heart racing, but her resolve unshakable. "I'm not casting anything aside, father. I'm building something new, something that belongs to me." And to Jon, she glanced at Jon, and then returned her gaze to her father. "I'm not asking for your approval, I'm telling you the truth."